Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Big Plantation. And we are live on FPRNradio.com. We just entered our second hour. And we're going to be having Chris Cantwell come on here in a couple moments. If you guys don't know about Chris Cantwell, he runs a blog, ChristopherCantwell.com. Mike, anything you want to elaborate on?
Well, Christopher Cantwell is a comedian, and he's kind of gained a reputation in the liberty movement for being pretty uncompromising and pretty controversial. He doesn't really have much of a filter, but we'll let him speak for himself and just go ahead and bring him on. Chris, are you there?
I'm here. Good to be with you guys.
Thanks a lot for coming on to the show. So, A cubed, what do you think about that? You got that yet?
I like it, man. Yeah, I took that sort of, A3 thing in a whole different direction, and, it seems to have been well received for the most part.
So the main thing that I want to talk to you about is, because I know you're very outspoken about this, and you and Larkin Rose agree on this, the whole using defensive force against the state. When is it necessary? Is it justified morally? Or is the article that Larkin put out, when is it okay to kill a cop? That would be an example. Why don't you kind of just give us your, rundown on, defensive force and being in compliance with the non-aggression principle?
Well, I mean, the non-aggression principle is pretty clear that, I have, when I'm facing a threat to person or property, then I can use whatever level of force is necessary to repel that threat. Now, unfortunately, it's very unpractical to use force against agents of the state most of the time because, they've been stealing from us for centuries and have, really awesome weaponry and, vehicles and radios and lots of people on their team. And we're just so outnumbered that it's not a practical thing to do. But I think that, the question of, when should you kill a cop or, when should you kill a government agent is, several hundred years ago is frankly the answer. Like when the first American tax collector was hired, that sounds like a pretty good time to have started doing it here. And, then it would have been musket on musket. And if only people had, been able to see the future, maybe they'd have, not created a new government after they had that whole revolution thing.
So, I mean, but still, I mean, I think it's, like you said, it's in compliance with the non-aggression principle. At what point is it not only, can we just talk about philosophically and justify it morally, but at what point does it become, even if impractical, either inevitable or if not, a must? You know what I mean? Like, must we start, kind of practicing this? Because the way I see it is with the way the police state is growing, with the laws that are in place, and always increasing, and with, the value of the money going down, the economy going down, we are being consistently driven into poverty where our chances of being able to, pull this off are going lower and lower. So at what point does, now's the most practical time to do it?
Well, I mean, that's a value judgment that each individual makes for themselves. I mean, I don't tend to, for all my hatred of the state, I tend to obey its laws. So I don't really find myself in too many positions where, like, it would be worth risking my life for the minute chance of escape that, pulling a gun on a cop provides me with. But, if you're a guy who, decided to, travel across straight lines with a kilo of cocaine and a fully automatic rifle, I'd say that if you got pulled over, it probably makes a lot more sense to shoot the cop than to let him search your car. As far as, a more big picture thing of, people in general rising up, I would say that, the moment that it became possible to succeed in that goal would be the time to do it, because obviously this is going to get worse as time goes on. We have thousands of years of history to tell us that, governments do not improve with time. They don't improve with age. They get worse. And, if people will tell us, well, you can't fight the government because it's not musket on musket anymore and they've got nuclear weapons and yada, yada, yada. I'm like, well, do you think that that's going to be better in the future? And the answer is probably not. We don't have a whole lot of history to tell us that governments weaken themselves over time. They get stronger and more powerful. And yes, they will eventually collapse, but when they collapse, they tend to kill millions of people. And that's something that, certainly, is not going to look good for any of us. So, when is it appropriate for, the people as a collective to rise up? I mean, that's a question that when it becomes morally acceptable amongst some portion of the population, then I would say that, it would happen rather quickly, and maybe not even, I don't like to use the term revolution because that like tends to imply that you're creating another government, but if people just sort of understood that it was okay to defend yourself against aggressors, then I think that you'd have, a lot of dead police and tax collectors in a rather short period of time, and then people wouldn't want those jobs. And, this would, the theory of government, the idea would just sort of, not work and cease to exist.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and it's a scary question to have to ask, but in this climate where, polls are getting 30% turnout of people saying that we're going to need an armed revolution to secure our rights. I know you don't like that word, but that's what it was. Congress is at 5% approval rate. The president is at 30% approval rate. Angst against the government and the government pushback getting at an all-time high where it's getting to be every day that you can see a cop shooting somebody or just doing violence on somebody. I think it's our duty to kind of have an adult, serious conversation about this. And so the way I see it is, like as you said, at what point does it happen collectively? That's going to be a hard thing to organize and get people to agree on. But the way I see it is, we already do it in other countries for a lot less than what we're suffering here. We have people who, just because the government told them to, basically going over and dropping drones and doing the exact same thing. Now, I've never had any altercation or any threat of an altercation from anybody from Yemen or Pakistan or even Afghanistan and Iraq, yet I've been personally attacked by the cops multiple times and have been fined from them multiple times, which is, is threat of attack. At least here in Philadelphia, like I said earlier, every time I turn around, somebody's going to jail, and it seems like that's happening across the country. So it seems to me that we might have to actually ask ourselves this: at what point do we fight? It seems to me that war has been declared already, if not through a piece of paper that we all know is useless, by action.
Oh yeah, I mean, when you've got a situation, I mean, the thing that happened with me in the Free State Project, right? I mean, when do you kill a cop? Well, probably before he says there's a war on terrorism, you're a terrorist, and I'm buying a 2-ton weapon of war to use against you. I mean, there was a thing in just, they were posting from Keene, they had the Keene Pumpkin Festival, which is just, it's the most ridiculous thing. I mean, it's just a family, outing where there's, it's a pumpkin festival, it's a fall festival, and it's really just a nice thing, and they caught the Keene police had snipers on the rooftop. They actually had video and pictures of these guys with sniper rifles on the rooftops outside of the Pumpkin Festival. And I'm like, there's no crime here. There's no terrorism in this place. Now you're literally at the point that you're on the rooftops pointing rifles at us. This is not funny. This is not some, negotiation that needs to happen. These people need to stop doing it. And the thing that, is the barrier to it is that people don't understand it. If people understood it, this would already be happening, right? Like this, we just stopped this train already if people understood it. So, I mean, at this point, within the foreseeable future, it's just a matter of, it's a tough barrier to break, even with anarchists, to, explain to them that, force is a necessary thing in human society, unfortunately. One of two things is true. Either we're all going to agree to the same nonviolent standard of conduct, or people will use force. With any sort of understanding of human society or how people tend to behave, I think it's terribly unlikely that you're going to get everybody to agree on non-initiation of force, on the non-aggression principle, or any standard of conduct whatsoever, much less something that's non-violent, all the violence that we have in human history. So I think it's sort of like important for people to accept that, some role for violence in human society. And unfortunately, in anarchist circles, it's very difficult to talk about, because the whole reason that we're anarchists is because we have this aversion to the use of force, and we don't like it. And since we don't like it, then we don't want to, exercise it in our own personal lives. And it seems to go contrary to our philosophy. But if people are able to differentiate the difference between initiatory and defensive force and retaliatory force, then I think that that's something that hasn't been broken through within this community and is not a part of the conversation. That's why I try so hard to make it one.
Yeah, and it's a message that I think gets spread through our circles, that basically anarchism almost amounts to pacifism, which I see as incredibly dangerous. Just the way that people would say that the Second Amendment is our last bastion to defend ourselves from the government. our ability to respond and to be willing to respond to violence with retaliatory force is basically the last bastion that any individual has against threats of violence.
Well, yeah, and I think the thing that should scare anarchists the most is that, the people who claim to be free fighters who are getting ready to are constitutionalists, right? Like, you'll hear those guys talk about it, that, hey, well, we're going to try to fix this through the ballot box, but if we can't, then it's the cartridge box. I mean, you'll hear that in those circles from time to time, sovereign citizens and whatnot, people who think they're going to restore the republic. So, if you want to talk about a waste of bloodshed, if you want to talk about people dying and suffering needlessly, let's just go ahead and have a war, overthrow an elected government, and then hold an election. If they think that what I'm proposing is dangerous, just wait until these guys pick up their weapons, because that's the only people that I see, preparing for a shooting fight is people who think they're going to restore the republic. Now, if you want to start that over again, I mean, I love, Stefan Molyneux goes into a really great, mantra about that minarchy, it's the most dangerous form of all, because you get this illusion of the free market, and then there's staggering amounts of wealth are created, and then the government comes in, takes the wealth, and grows. And if you take this government and you give it the opportunity to grow, I mean, what good could possibly come of that? I mean, this thing could destroy the world 100 times over with its nuclear weapons as it is. It's waging more conflicts, military conflicts, than I can frankly keep track of. And to have that, continue for another couple hundred years, or even worse, to expand rapidly, sounds like an incredibly dangerous idea that I would do anything in my power to stop.
And you know what? I agree with you, but and I feel that one unfortunate thing about the predicament that we're in is as you said earlier, we're outnumbered, and I think that creates the necessity for coalitions with people we might not necessarily agree in, because if we're both shooting at the same person, it's going to better our chances. And the way I kind of see it is that we're going to have to start to I almost resent the term anarchist. I mean, I love the whole ideology of anarchist. I consider myself an anarchist, but in this climate, I feel that there is no such thing as an anarchist. I feel that to identify yourself as an anarchist right now would be an oxymoron, because freeing yourself from the matrix doesn't make you free. That's the first step. That's not the end. You know what I mean? So when we're talking about how do we achieve that, well, the mission obviously then becomes abolition, both of the government and their fascist friends in the media and all these corporations like Monsanto and that have threatened our freedom. And when you think about it that way, and tactic wise, anybody that can agree with the message of abolishment is going to be on our side, and then maybe we can have the conversation expand as we work together.
Well, there's some merit to that, and of course, I've got my minarchist friends and people who like the Constitution and stuff like that. And I figured it's just a matter of time before they figure out that that's not such a hot idea. So I'm happy to hang out with them. But I would say that everybody's an anarchist, and some people just don't realize it, because if anarchy is the non-belief in the state, well, it is a fact that the state does not actually exist, right? It's just a excuse for bad behavior. So there are people who would say that you can't be an anarchist because there is a state, and I say, well, everyone's an anarchist because the state does not exist, and that, if they choose to believe in that which is not true, then they're just, really misled people. We're all anarchists at the end of the day because there is no state. It's just an excuse for bad behavior, and that kind of frustrates me when people say that to me, because it's like, well, look at them. There is certainly this, group of individuals who are running around with guns telling us what to do, and that's true enough, but the state is it's a fiction, and eventually people sort of have to figure that out. And if there are people who want to reform the government, look, I'm not going to come and attack them for doing it necessarily. If I get into a conversation with them, then I'll explain to them what's wrong with their idea, but I'm more than happy to let them do that for the most part. I still think that it's important that those people understand that, they're not going to create some better initiatory force in violence. They're not going to create a better and more kind or gentler taxing authority and war-making authority. So if they don't understand that, and they pick up their guns and they overthrow an elected government and then they hold an election, we're in some serious problems. It'll get worse. I would hate to see that happen. I do think that there's a need for a certain understanding amongst a general population within a given geographic area, that this is not an okay way to behave. So I'm happy to see people want to make a kindler, gentler war-making and taxing authority. I just don't think that they're terribly likely to succeed, so I'd like to lead them to more successful goals.
And I agree with you, and I think that in moving forward, because minarchists and things like that, they have the same, they would claim to have the same values and the same principles as us. They're just not as stringent on them as those of us who would identify as anarchists would be. And for anybody in the audience who is, turned off by the term anarchist or, hasn't necessarily heard this, it has nothing to do with chaos. Anarchy is literally just Greek for without masters. We want to be our own rulers and live by our own morals and not harm each other and exist in freedom and free trade with people. That being said, but the one thing I do disagree with you is while I agree that anarchy is the natural state of the world, that we're all born free, we're all born with inalienable rights, that is never ever moral, no matter what job title or number that you have behind you to infringe upon, that just that belief in the illegitimacy of the state is not going to make them not write you a ticket at gunpoint if you are driving a way that they don't like. It's not going to make it so that you can, quote unquote, legitimately start a business without asking for their good graces first. It's not going to stop the IRS from, slamming down your door if you don't want to kill people in another country through your taxes. And that's what I mean when I say that that breaking away from the matrix it's the means, not the ends. You know what I mean? Like, if it was that simple, then we wouldn't even have to have this conversation. Now, if we expand it to include, I'm open to working with socialists, to be perfectly honest with you, because I feel that, under freedom, if you had voluntary socialism, it could run right alongside voluntary capitalism. So therefore, the problem with the ideology of socialism is the same as the problem in the ideology of capitalism, and that's government intervention on the purity of the idea. And, so I'd be down to work with them and to try and preach this message and grow our numbers as a force to, you know what I mean? Because if we don't work together in some way, as you said, we're very outnumbered and outgunned.
Well, I would agree to a certain extent. I'd say that, if there's a particular target that I want to attack and there's a bunch of leftists who want to do that, then I'm happy to, work with them on that. Some of the stuff that Adam Kokesh has done, for example, he's worked with Code Pink and the Thomas Jefferson dance party and stuff like that. And, fine, come along, show greater numbers. But I don't think, I disagree that, we can sort of like coexist with these people because, of course, the socialist doesn't believe in private property, which means they can come and take what's yours and then you have to kill them. And that's going to make for a very rough coexistence. If they don't like that you have more than they do and they come to take it, well, then they're going to get shot. And there's a rather serious problem that's going to occur when you've got a great deal of, people who don't understand economics trying to live irresponsibly, living next door to a bunch of people who understand economics are trying to live responsibly. So I'm happy to work with them if we can, attack a common enemy, that sort of thing. But I would say to people who think about doing that, be careful about who gets to control the message because, I know when we were down in D.C. with Adam, they would get in front of the cameras and sort of, pitch this leftist agenda and it got us associated with it in some ways. And that's a negative thing that I would encourage
when
people to
Heist
be
was down at
wary
the
of working with liberals.
RNC, he had black bloc anarchists come up to him when you were in the middle of Ron Paul groups.
Yeah, they were trying to get us to go for black bloc things and I denied them, but I think that kind of goes along with how effective freedom is. Because if you are in freedom and everybody is responsible for themselves and they're going to be making decisions that they're going to be responsible for, it's going to be in their best interest to listen to the person that makes the most sense, and they're going to pay the price if they don't. So I think that the idea of natural leaders becomes that much more important because as people in this hodgepodge of socialism, Tea Party, minarchists, anarchists, if we're forced to work together and we're all agreeing, or at least think that we're agreeing that we're fighting for freedom, the person who makes the most sense is going to win out. And I think good examples of that are why Ron Paul was so successful at what he was in his run, at the grassroots level, why Adam Kokesh became what he did in the alternative media. But, we got 5 minutes before the break, Chris. The last thing I want to wrap up on is, I don't know if you were around for the theme of our show, but basically, the theme of our show this week, we are talking about how being involved in this quest for freedom has affected your personal life and your personal relationships and things like that. So, how do you feel about that? How basically living in this kind of information war has changed your personal life?
It's interesting. I mean, I've basically lost all of my friends that I had previously, but I've made so many new friends. So, but then now that like I've sort of gained a certain amount of like popularity on the interwebs there and the YouTube channel and whatnot, like my old friends are now contacting me like, that's cool, I want to do it too. So if anybody out there is feeling that they're getting ostracized from their old friends and stuff like that, just keep on doing what you're doing. It'll work out for the best in the end.
No, I've experienced that. You know, like I said, I had friends who, once I started, you know, I would get into it with my old boss about income taxes being illegal and, you know, it looks like they lied on 9/11. And before I knew it, I was hearing rumors that I'm, like, hooked on drugs. And, you know, I've since had these same people, you know, they might not agree with me, but they've definitely come to me and said, you know, I respect the fact that you move forward and do what you love to do, and that you have a passion and that you move forward regardless of the obstacles. So, I mean, at least it kind of commands that respect.
Wavering under pressure is never a good way to earn respect in my experience. So, I mean, when people try to, you know, bring it to you and discourage you from doing something and you persevere and you move forward with it, it tends to work out in your best interest, is my experience.
So was there any of those experiences where you were kind of shedding, or as I like to call it, your former life? You know, like in my former life, I was a big, you know, video gamer, you know, and that's what sucked up the amount of time that I put into this movement now. Is there any particular experience that you just have gotten, like, what you would feel like an immense, like, personal insight through this whole thing? Because I feel that on top of the importance of the message, that I've just learned so much about myself through this journey.
Certainly, I've learned a lot about myself, done a lot of reflecting on a lot of different things, and you know, my friends that I had before I got into all of this, I mean, I had sort of separated from a lot of them to begin with, because I mean, a lot of my friends got into drugs. I mean, I moved to Brooklyn in 2007 or 2006 rather, and you know, when I came back, like a bunch of my friends were like hooked on heroin and ended up in prison or dead. So I was sort of getting away from them as it was, and as I found like this like sort of moral code that sort of preached responsibility, even though it allowed for the use of drugs, it was sort of didn't make sense to do them and not to associate with people who would steal and do bad things to get them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, what I have learned in a lot of ways too, is that when you cling to those principles that you value so much, you seem to get so much better results. We're going to be coming up against the break here in less than 2 minutes. Do you have anything that you want to plug or information you want to put out about yourself?
Check out the blog, ChristopherCantwell.com, and there's my YouTube channel /YouTube/FreedomFighter631, or you can find the YouTube channel through ChristopherCantwell.com. Follow me on Twitter, vote for Cantwell. And, you know, I keep on pumping out entertaining content, gaining subscribers and Facebook likes by the day, and I'd love for all of your listeners to join the party because we're having a blast.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely put a smile on my face. And in closing, why do you hate Miss Giffords so much?
Because she's a gun control advocate. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out where that leads. We've got enough history to tell us what happens. You know, gun control precedes genocide. So, you know, this woman is really an advocate of genocide as far as I'm concerned. She's an advocate of something that's been the responsibility for more misery, suffering, and death than any other thing combined, really. And you know, to feel sympathy for her to, you know, wind up with a bullet in her head is just a perfect irony, in my opinion. So, fuck her.
So, there you have it. Maoists, Stalinists, Leninists, you are all the same ilk that will be feeling sympathy for Miss Giffords. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Chris. We look forward to talking to you again here soon.
Thanks for having me, guys.